Marissa, hello. Thank you so much for coming on the channel and talking to me about your wonderful young adult paranormal thriller romance series. What would you say the genre is? Is it a paranormal thriller?
Oh, that's really good. I label it as a paranormal thriller,
Okay,
because it's not necessarily a paranormal romance, because I mean there
right.
is romance, but it's kind of more focused on the thriller elements. So I don't really know, but that's kind of what I'm branding it as.
No, I mean, you have so many thrilling elements and also relationships with so much chemistry that it's like you can brand it as all sorts of different things. It's a very, very cool and unique series. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your books?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Marissa Lete. I write young adult novels. Echoes and Anomalies are my two books that I have out so far. I started writing when I was like, I don't know, like 2 years old, probably. I used to like make books and like staple them together, and like I just kept writing like through high school and through college. And then I didn't really realize until recently that I was like, oh, I can actually like do this as like a job and like, like actually pursue this passion. And so, yeah, I just kind of got into it. And so Echoes is my series is about a girl named Laura who has this ability to hear echoes of the past wherever she goes. And she starts hearing echoes of stuff happening from last year that she doesn't remember happening to her. And so then all this crazy stuff starts to happen. So yeah, that's kind of my little elevator pitch for it.
It's an amazing series for all of those of you who are watching who haven't read it. It's so exciting and romantic and adorable and thrilling and has all of the good stuff in it. So you should absolutely go check out the series.
Thank you.
So in this interview conversation today, we're going to be talking about craft stuff and really diving deep into how to write young adult and how to write thrilling plots and how to write chemistry between characters. So if you're interested in learning about any of those things, definitely continue watching. But we are going to start by talking about writing educations. So in your writing education, what was the thing that helped you the most as you were learning how to write?
So I don't have like a formal education when it comes to writing necessarily. I didn't study creative writing. I didn't go to school for that or anything. My basic understanding of writing was like my high school English classes, my college English classes. And so I think most of my writing knowledge and what I've learned comes from just reading and reading everything I can get my hands on. I read almost exclusively young adult, which is probably bad, but yeah. And so I just read constantly. I was like that nerdy kid in high school that would like go to the library during lunch break and just like read books. And I would read like a book every single day. I swear, I read so many books. And so that's just how I learned. I took one creative writing class, I think, in college, but it was mostly just through reading and kind of absorbing like what other authors are doing and how they craft their narratives, how they develop their characters. And I think just through absorbing all that is how I learned how to make it myself.
Reading is really the best education. Like I find that I get so much better as a writer when I actually sit down and read. Like sometimes I can be bad about it because I'll put off reading for writing if I'm on a deadline or something. But every single time I get writer's block or anything, just going and sitting down and reading for a couple of hours just does magical things to my brain. I don't know what it is, but it's so helpful.
Seriously, yeah, it absolutely is. Like if I ever just get stuck, I just go read a book, because reading is just, you have to take in as much as you're putting out. So yeah.
Yeah. Did you take any like online courses after high school and college or like have any like resources or books that you read that helped you learn how to write?
I have read a couple of craft books. My favorite one is Save the Cat. I actually have it right here. Save the Cat Writes a Novel is like, this is like my go-to book when I'm plotting, when I'm thinking about my characters, when I'm trying to get things done, because it has a breakdown of like story structure and like character development and kind of themes and how to make all of that come together. So this is my education right here.
It's a great book. I have this one that I really like. It was like kind of a Save the Cat type book too, but it's like slightly different. It's like more of kind of a rule short form, like, I don't know, it's like 47 rules for learning how to write. But I think Save the Cat is a little bit more thorough. This one is also like a screenwriting book that I really love, which helps, I think, for like principles of storytelling, but not so much for novel writing. So I think Save the Cat is probably good and better for all around.
Yeah, it's my favorite. I love it.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. So what initially drew you to YA? Like, I know you said that you've always read YA and loved reading it. Is there anything about it that draws you to writing it?
I never grew up, I guess. I just, that's just what I read almost exclusively, like I said. And so I think what you read really has an impact on what you write. And I think there's something just so beautiful about young people, and you're kind of in this weird spot where you're learning how to like exist in the world, and you're just like, everything is kind of new, and like, you know, relationships are new. So like the romance to me is like more fun when it's like, I don't know, it's like new. And
Yeah.
I just love the idea that like young people, we don't give them as much credit sometimes. You know, sometimes people will read young adult novels and they'll be like, oh, this is totally like not something a teenager would do. But I think teenagers are capable of saving the world when they need to. And I think there's just something so cool about that to me.
Yeah. No, I agree. There's like so much hope embedded in a lot of YA too, and like it's so much more fun to read protagonists, I think, that are like, believe that they are capable and clever enough to escape really difficult situations, instead of kind of like the hardened adults that are like, this is not realistic, or like they're like, we can do it, you know. It's more active and fun.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
So would you recommend, like, if somebody wants to read or like write a specific genre of YA, do you recommend like reading really widely or reading really deep into that one genre? Which one do you think is more helpful?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I personally like to go deep into the genre, but generally not while I'm writing in that genre. So like my books that are kind of like paranormal-esque comes from 5-10 years ago when I was reading all the paranormal novels that came after the surgence of Twilight, you know, and all of those books that came out. And so that was kind of like, I don't read paranormal so much anymore because I want it to be unique. I want it to be different, right? Like I don't want to be like carbon copying something, but I think you have to read it at some point before you write in that genre. And then like right now I'm reading tons and tons of YA fantasy because my next series is going to be a fantasy series. And so I think like doing it before and maybe not during the process. That's kind of how I do it.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so much to learn from reading outside of the genre too, like reading really random books that even aren't YA books. Like, I mean, said from somebody who like really only exclusively reads YA, but like reading other random books can really like open your mind to different, I don't know. It's tough. I think all of it helps, but I definitely do like reading in the genre too.
Yeah. And you learn so much. Even just like lately, I've been kind of dabbling into like poetry, and I've been dabbling into like short stories and like playwrights can teach you so much about dialogue that can really help your writing. So yeah, there's so many different things that you can read. Just read everything.
Yeah, and poetry too. Like I took a poetry class in college and I really didn't want to take it. Like I'd never really written any poetry and it was a little bit uncomfortable, but I learned so much about language in that class. Like even though I had to push, because I had to push myself to use language in ways that I wasn't used to. And like my teacher always told me that my poems were way too literal, but like for me, they were really kind of out there and bizarre and wacky, but it really, I think, helps your prose to learn how to write poetry too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All the different formats, just try them all.
So what does your drafting process typically look like when you start writing a book?
Ooh, so it's changed so much actually. When I wrote Echoes, I wrote it pretty fast. I wrote it basically like on my lunch break at work. I didn't have an official lunch break, so don't tell my boss. But I basically was just kind of writing it in between moments and stuff. And I wrote it pretty quick. I think I finished it in like 6 months, but that was like finished pretty much. Like I didn't have to change very much except for some heavy line editing. But then with Anomalies, it was so much slower of a process. And I don't know what happened with that one. It took me so much longer to write that book. The good part was when I finished it, it was pretty much done. I didn't have to like edit a ton of stuff. Now that I'm writing the third book in the series, I'm just writing and I'm just like not even looking back. I'm just going and it's very bad and I'm going to have to edit a lot of stuff, but I'm just kind of drafting. So it's been changing. And I think with each book, it's different. So yeah.
Yeah, well, sequels also seem to be, I mean, I know in my experience, writing the sequel was so much harder than writing the first one.
Yes.
Like you have to come up with a conflict that's equally as exciting, but not the same. And then you don't want to have like dragging middle book syndrome. So like you don't want to have, and then you want the characters to develop in ways that are true to their characters in book one. You don't want them to become completely different people. It's such a headache.
It's so hard. And I think that's why the second book took me so much longer, because I was really trying to get into the themes of the story and kind of the character development and like the lessons that they needed to learn, right? And so mine is a trilogy. And so I also have to think about, well, in book 2, I can't have everything be resolved, right? I still have a huge chunk of the story that I want to tell. And so it's really difficult to do that. It's a really tricky kind of balance. And then you're like living up to the hype of the first book. You got to make sure that it's like good or better. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been doing so much thinking about sequels and like I'm starting, I don't know, like I just keep thinking about the Hunger Games and like how the Hunger Games sequel, like Catching Fire, really captured the part of the Hunger Games that was so exciting because they like had a new game and like new tributes and the new kind of competition, and they didn't just go right into the rebellion. Like, I mean, these spoiler alert for the Hunger Games, like you've had enough time to read it, but like they were able to kind of repeat it in a way that was still different and still more intense. Like I liked Catching Fire more than the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Thinking about that in terms of sequel, but it's really hard to do that for normal plots too. Like in my book, I wasn't like, I'm not gonna have like another bunch of kids go missing, like this time 5 go missing. Like I don't want to just like keep doing the same thing.
Yeah. I think part of it for me, because I'm kind of more of a plotter. I'm not like a really heavy detailed plotter. I'm like a hazy plotter. That's kind of what I think of myself as, because I understand kind of the big picture going into it. I always start with the ending. I always like know the ending. I know like the ending snapshot. And then I kind of just have to work through that and figure out how I'm going to get there. And so when I started my sequel, Anomalies, I already knew the whole arc of the story. I already knew how the very last book is going to end. Like I already have pretty much the big picture themes and stuff set out. And so that really helped me a lot. And pantsers are going to hate that I say this because, you know, for pantsers, they don't like to know the ending, but it really did help me to know at least just the major like themes, right? So like my main character in book 1, the same theme that started in book 1 is carrying into book 2 and carrying into book 3, but we're exploring new aspects of that struggle, that internal battle that she's facing, you know? And so I had to kind of really figure out what those themes were for each book before I even started like writing them. Executing it was a lot harder, but.
So do you typically start with theme? Like what are some, could you talk a little bit about theme? Because I actually haven't really heard very many authors talk about writing with theme. And I have a lot of thoughts about this because I recently watched, I don't know if, I think you went to 20 books to 50K.
I did, yeah.
So I was watching the YouTube replays because I wasn't able to go this year or last year. And there was that one guy that came, I think his name was Maxwell Alexander Drake, and he did a bunch of talks about craft, and he talked so much about theme. And I remember watching those lectures that he gave, and I bought his books and I'm working my way through them now. And I'm just like, it clicked in my brain somehow, like having kind of a universal human theme and writing your book around that and plotting around that. So now I've been really working on that with my series.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about theme? Because I really would love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yes, I've missed all of his talks at 20 books to 50K, and I've not caught up on the videos yet, but I'll tell you what I think. So for me, like the theme of the book is basically, I kind of go into it with the idea of what does the main character need to learn? What kind of like internal struggle do they need to overcome? And so Save the Cat actually really helped me kind of boil it down to this, because until I had read that book, I hadn't really thought too much about like my flawed main character and what they need to learn by the end of the book. But it kind of really boils down to like, what is the major lesson that your character needs to learn? And so I think that for me, like a lot of authors will say like they write the book first, and then it isn't until they finish it that they figure out what the theme is. But I like to be kind of thinking about the theme as I go. And I like to kind of figure the theme out, because that'll help me figure out what kinds of scenes I need to put in this book, right? Like what is going to help my character learn this lesson or unlearn this lesson in some instances, right? So, you know, with Echoes, my main character, Laura, her kind of main journey through all the books is kind of a journey of self-acceptance. And, you know, that's kind of something we're all trying to work on, right? So it's relatable. And so, you know, in book one, she has a lot of things that she goes through, and she has like a little bit of, she kind of figures out how to sort of accept parts of herself, because she has this unique ability, right? And she feels like an outsider because of it. And so she doesn't really accept herself. She wants to fit in with normal society. And then, spoiler alert a little bit, throughout the course of the book, some events occur where she's no longer the only person that has an ability, right? And so by the end of the book, she feels a little bit more like accepting of herself. But then in book two, we kind of explore that in a different way, because she's suddenly exposed to all of these other people who have different abilities like hers. And some of them are really cool. Some of them are really helpful in situations, but then others are really not great. And so there's one character in particular in book two, Veronica, that Laura just really clashes with. And she really just doesn't like this character at all. There's some drama because she's trying to steal her man, you know, all that. But it's kind of this reflection of the things that Laura is thinking about herself are coming out towards Veronica, really, because she sees that kind of same theme. And so she has a little bit of regression, right? In book one, she kind of figured out how to accept certain parts of herself. But then in book two, she starts seeing other people that she's like, oh yeah, that ability is not helpful. That ability sucks. And so she starts to kind of internalize that. She doesn't even realize that she's doing it, right? And so I don't know, that's kind of like how I went about thinking about the theme. And so that's why I inserted that character. That's why I introduced Veronica in the first place, because I was like, Laura needs some people that are showing her, like Angelo. She loves Angelo. He's like super cool. He has like this technological electricity ability. And so she's like, he's super helpful. He can do so many things. She loves that. So in a sense, she kind of sees herself in him because she's an anomaly too. But then she also sees herself in Veronica, but she starts to focus more on the negative side of things. And so it isn't until she's able to accept herself that she's able to go into the ending of the book. And I won't spoil anything, but yeah. So I don't know. I think of like the internal journey. What is the big picture? What is what they need to learn to be able to achieve their goals?
Yeah, no, that was so well said. Yeah, I'm also working on that for my series, although I'm pretty sure that like my less like my big major theme of this book is like playing God is bad, because they kind of like go into all these different like necromancy things, and they're like starting to bring people back into other people's bodies, but then like there start to be consequences to what they're doing, and like they have to start to learn that like, okay, just because they're doing it for their friends and their family, and like they're doing it because they want to, doesn't mean it's actually a good thing, and doesn't mean that their friends and family are more important than other people's friends and family. And
yeah, you can get too deep in there sometimes, like
oh my god, yeah, but it's so helpful. And it's so interesting that like you introduced Veronica with that in mind, that because like, I mean, I remember reading it and I was like, oh, you know, she's super annoying, because like you're reading it through Laura's eyes, but then hearing you say that, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Like they really do play off of each other in this really interesting way.
Yeah, and it's like it's so helpful to me. Like I know some authors will just write it and then they'll realize later, oh wow, cool, I introduced this cool theme. But for me, like, I don't know, I just love knowing the purpose behind it. And there's also kind of a theme there of like friendship, right? Because she like hates this character, right? But then eventually they learn to tolerate each other. And so, yeah, I like knowing a little, at least a glimpse. Sometimes it changes, sometimes it doesn't work out. But yeah, it helps me.
Yeah, no. So how did you find your theme? Because did you start Echoes with that theme already in mind? Because you said that you like Save the Cat kind of opened your eyes to that. Was that after or before you wrote Echoes?
I read Save the Cat after I wrote Echoes. So Echoes is the second novel that I've ever written. I wrote a novel way back in high school. It's somewhere on Wattpad. Don't ever read it. But I think because I wrote that first novel, I kind of already had a general kind of picture of like, okay, this is how I tell a story that's compelling. But Echoes, I kind of just wrote that for fun. I wasn't even intending to publish it, anything. And it wasn't until like I finished writing it and some people started reading it, they were like, you should publish this. So I didn't really go into Echoes with that idea in mind already. But after I finished Echoes, I took a look at the book and I said, what are the main themes of this book? What kinds of things is this book trying to send a message about, right? Like, what do I want my readers to learn from this book? And so after I kind of pinpointed that, that's when I took that in Anomalies and I went with it. So, you know, I guess I kind of pantsed it a little bit because I didn't know what the themes were, but once I knew what they were, it really helped me with the second book. And it's really helping me with the third book as well.
Yeah, that's how I did it too. I had no idea what a theme was when I wrote They Stay. And now like I did that when writing book two. And it really did help. Like now, I mean, I don't know, my draft process for this book has just been all over the place, because like I had a completed draft, then I sent it to beta readers in November, and I got feedback in like mid-December, late December, and I spent about 3 weeks trying to implement feedback. I got all the way up to like chapter 15, and then I was like, you know, I don't have enough time to actually finish implementing beta reader feedback. I have to start going chapter by chapter with my line editor. So I started like I did a chapter a day with my line editor and tried to edit the back half of the book and like rewrite it in accordance to beta reader feedback. And I caught up very quickly with my line editor, and I've just been like writing chapters of the book from scratch for like the past 3 weeks, like tried racing toward this deadline.
Oh man, that's rough.
But it is helpful to know the major theme, because I'm like looking at the outline and being like, okay, well, maybe even though I did put this in my revised outline back in November, it doesn't really play to the major theme. So maybe I can skip it and not have to write that today.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So do you have a certain plot structure that you typically like to follow? Like I know you mentioned that you are kind of between like a plotter and a pantser, like not a really detailed plotter, but do you have a favorite outlining structure? Are there certain plot beats that you really like to know? Like I know you said the ending, but are there other ones?
I like to know the ending. I like to know the midpoint. And I like to know the main, like I think it's in Save the Cat, it's like the all is lost beat, where like everything just falls apart. Everything just suddenly goes to crap. Like everything is just terrible. And I really like to I really like to know that moment. Sometimes I even start with that moment. Like I'll just write that moment. I'm like, yes, all the characters are dying. Like, I don't know, it's fun for me to do that. But yeah, I really like to know the middle. I really like to know the end. And I'll get images along the way of, you know, like, oh, this would be a really cool scene to include. This would be a really cool, thing that ties into the ending, and so as I go, I'll start kind of getting more and more ideas that relate back to that midpoint and to that ending. And so yeah, those are the main ones that I think I focus on.
Do they ever change after you start writing?
Yes always. Interestingly enough, I almost decided to make Echoes and Anomalies a duology.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I totally did not. There's another project in my heart that I really want to work on. It's a fantasy series. There's pirates. It's really exciting. And so I've been thinking about this book for years now. It's like half written already, but it's just a side project. And so for a while there, I was like, I really want to do a duology with Echoes and Anomalies, because I don't want to write another book. I want to move on to my next project, right? And so I actually was planning. I had an ending in mind that would have wrapped everything up. I did have an ending in mind. But one of the reasons that I decided to continue it instead, and I decided to go with the other ending, was Laura's internal kind of journey was not finished yet. She, in book 2, even with kind of the plot that I had planned that would have kind of wrapped everything up, it was too rushed. It was too quick. There wasn't enough kind of like satisfaction there. There wasn't enough of her time for her to be able to grow. And so as I got about halfway through, I had both of it was like a parallel universe kind of situation. I had both of them in my head, and I was like, I don't know which one it's going to be, but we're just going to keep writing. And so as I got deeper into the book, I realized this really needs to be a trilogy, because there's really so much more that she needs to learn. And there's so many cool things in the world that I still want to show. And there's so many cool things. I didn't want to rush all of that. So yeah.
That makes sense. And Anomalies was so fast paced. Like I remember reading it and just like, it was in the middle of my deadline. So like I would just like be sneaking breaks to like go read a couple of pages and then go back. But every single time like they got into something, like somehow the villain was able to outsmart them or beat them, or like, it just like, it really seemed like all hope was lost at your all hope was lost moment. And I remember like being so frustrated for the characters, being like, I really don't know how they're going to escape this. Like, it really doesn't seem like it's possible for them to escape this, because these people are just so powerful. Like, how did you manage to come up with villains that were that powerful and that quick thinking without like running your plot into the ground?
Oh
like,
my gosh.
ways for them to escape?
I do not know. I really do not know. It was like one of those things where during Anomalies, like while I was writing it, the main question I had in my mind was, what can go wrong? Like any kind of situation that they get in, what is the worst possible thing that could happen, Yeah. And then I think it was having, I really like villains that are just way smarter. And realistically, these are teenagers, right? Like they are smart, but they're going up against people who are like also super, super smart and have been around and in the game a lot longer than they have. And so realistically, I was thinking like, okay, these teenagers are probably not like smart enough to come up with this super like cool, epic, heist that actually works. And so I always had to think of like, okay, well, what would somebody know that would prevent them from that? And so I think it was kind of also a lot of setup for book 3, because I wanted to kind of build up the villains a little bit. I wanted to make them seem a little bit more like powerful and like intense. And so kind of raise the stakes, right? And so I wanted there to be that. But then it was really hard, because I was like, but I also need to show that they are capable of winning, because, maybe they might win in the end. Maybe they won't. I'm not going to spoil anything. But, like I'm rooting for them, right? And so I wanted to make it so that it was still possible for them to win, but in a weird, different kind of sort of way that wasn't necessarily they were smarter, but they just always kind of had the power within themselves. And if you've read book 2, you might kind of know what I'm talking about. I don't want to spoil it, but yeah.
Gotcha. And how did you keep it so fast paced? Like it was just like one really exciting thing after another really exciting thing. Is there like a method that you use to plot it out to like keep things really moving at such a fast pace?
I am just a really lean writer in general. don't think I've ever written a book that's more than like 80,000 words. Because me as a writer, I just want to know what happens next. I'm a really kind of like plot focused. I mean, I do focus on the characters too, but I just like it to keep moving. I don't like there to be a lot of like downtime and like dead space and like filler chapters. And I think part of that is, you know, there are times when you're going to need to fill, right? Like between the 50% mark and the 25% mark, you're going to have to find something to stick in there. And if you think of it as filler, it's going to start becoming filler. So I like to just think like, okay, well, what's the next plot point? What's the next thing that's going to happen? And I don't want it to feel like filler. So I make sure that there is a plot point for every single kind of like thing that's happening. I don't really know how I just kind of think of it in that way of like, I don't want there to be filler, but I want there still needs to be downtime. There still needs to be like, you know, those moments for them to really reflect and grow. But yeah, I don't know.
Because I heard that there's like some like I've heard the thriller writing advice that like you come up with like the bare bones plot, like things that would need to happen to get them from point A to point B and try to get them between points as fast as possible. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah. I think you need every scene, every line needs to be pushing the story forward a little bit. Everything, there should never be just a scene that's just random and just like kind of pointless, right? I mean, even just the stuff that's like filler, right? Like there's like a little scene in my book where the characters are playing a prank on somebody else, but even that scene has some significance because it shows you that like these are kids dealing with this big huge situation that's way above their heads, right? And so even the little filler moments still have significance in character development and in lesson learning and kind of building into that theme. And so I just always try to reflect everything back to the theme. And so I think maybe that's part of what helps too, is I always, if there's a time where I need to add some filler, I think, okay, well, what scene could I put here that will be a direct reflection of something else later on that they can reflect back on? And so, yeah, just making sure that everything is moving the story forward in some way.
Gotcha. Yeah. And what about characters? Like how do you like map out all of your different character arcs and like have that kind of be like a beginning, middle, end story for all of them or just for some of them? Or like how much character work do you do? Because I know a lot of people struggle, I think, with characters and thrillers. Like I know I've heard that also like a lot of thriller readers will be frustrated because like a lot of authors won't spend a lot of time on the characters, but like all of the characters in Echoes and Anomalies were so well like thought out and had such different personalities. So how did you flesh them out and kind of grow them as people?
Well, thank you. I think that a lot of it just comes naturally once you have a good idea of who that person is, what they want, and what struggles are preventing them from getting what they want. And so I do that mainly for my main characters, Laura, Maverick, and the villains. But I don't necessarily do that for all of the side characters all the time. But I usually generally like to have a really good idea. I'll write like a little page of like backstory of like, okay, they grew up here. This is their family situation. This is where they live. This is the struggles. Like these are their internal battles that they're facing. You know, Laura's dealing with self-acceptance. Maverick's dealing with guilt. You know, all of these other characters are dealing with their own little things. And so I think just kind of having that knowledge and having that understanding of your characters and who they are, what they want, and just really making them three-dimensional helps to, when you're writing the dialogue, when you're in the scene, it just kind of helps all that to fall into place naturally. And so I don't necessarily plan out all of their arcs and like where they're going to go in this book necessarily, but I know what they're facing. And so I can reflect back on that theme as I go. So.
Very cool. Yeah. Speaking of Laura and Maverick, I would love to talk to you a little bit about chemistry, and like you had such an interesting relationship dynamic in Echoes, because like, I mean, this is in the description, so it's not really a spoiler, but like Laura does hear echoes of like her relationship and like doesn't know who this really like who this person is that she's hearing herself be in a relationship with. And it's like, it's such an interesting setup because you don't really have Maverick there with her for like, no spoilers.
What?
Um
Yeah.
but how did you approach like writing the chemistry between them and like the kind of first love? Because it was so cute and like just so like I was reading it like smiling the whole time. Like, how do you approach writing romantic scenes between characters and like writing characters that really have that kind of spark between them?
Oh, it's so tricky. It's so hard. But I love Laura and Maverick. Their love is just so pure and like innocent. It's just so cute. And I just love them so much. I don't really know. It's kind of, I think for me, when it comes to romance, the biggest part of the romance is the buildup, right? Like the tension, right? And so it was a little bit tricky to go about that in my book because they aren't like meeting each other in the traditional sense of like they meet and then they start talking to each other and then they build that up, because this happened a year ago, right? And so I kind of had these parallel timelines of like, okay, so I actually did go and write the scenes from Laura's perspective when they were happening. And so I wrote all those scenes of like the year before. And then I had to come back and rewrite the scene from Laura's perspective, hearing it now that she doesn't remember him and she doesn't know. Yeah. And it was
such a crazy, like mind twisty writing experience.
It was so, I don't even know where this idea came from in the first place. I've always been kind of obsessed with the amnesia trope. I really like.
Oh yeah, I have some questions about that too. We're getting there.
Yes. So yeah, I knew that like it was hard because I had to kind of build up the romantic tension for, spoiler alert, later in the book when they possibly do meet. I'll say that. But yeah, like I had to kind of just, I don't know, romance is so tricky. And like the best thing I think I've done is just reading a romance novel can teach you so much about building tension, even if your tension is like angry tension, even if it's like, you know, like the villain, like tension is like, romance authors have that like forever. They will have the crown for tension. Yeah
no, I don't read a ton of romance books, but like the last romance book, like actual, I mean, I don't know if this is really, this is like, there's a lot of things going on in this book, but the last kind of romance book that I read was Verity by Colleen Hoover. And that book was just so like, I mean, it was romantic, but also in this like weird mind twisty way. And it was just like tension from the second that the main character walked on the page. Like it was just absolutely insane. I read it like 2 years ago and I'm still thinking about it. It's crazy.
It's so crazy how they do it. And I think really a lot of it is in body language, which was hard for me to do because she's hearing echoes. She doesn't actually see this happening. So I had to do a lot of it through the dialogue, which was tricky for me. But yeah, I think like romance, like body language, that like that heat, right? Like that, like they look across the room and they see each other, but then they look away. Like, I don't know, there's just so many little details that all go into this whole like building the tension of the romance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been doing a lot of thinking about like physical description recently and like ways that emotions manifest in the body and like how we as writers have to like have a bunch of different ways to describe different emotions and how they are like present in the body, which is not something that I do in day-to-day life. Like when I feel nervous, I'm not like, oh, my stomach clenches. Why is my stomach clenching? It's so weird because like we have to find ways to describe it that aren't telling the readers how the character is feeling, but we don't want to rely on the same physical tells every single time that the character feels a certain way. And it's just, oh my, it's driving me crazy. I don't know how, because romance has to really live in the body. Like it might be good for me to actually read some more straight romances and see how other authors tackle that.
Yeah. And something that I love, I don't have it on my shelf.
Is it the Emotions-osaurus?
I
love that book.
Oh my gosh. during line edits, that book is a necessity. Okay, you have to get this book. And they have different thesauruses for like settings, and they have a bunch of them. But the emotion thesaurus is so great because you can just flip to a page and it's like angry, and it'll describe literally like 2 pages of possible body responses to being angry, and it's so important for line editing. I love it.
Oh, yeah. And then also like the mental cues, like they'll say like, you know, may overthink things, and then you can actually show a character like, oh, they're just gonna like stream of consciousness overthink this thing, and oh, it's so good.
Yes, such a good book. Buy it if you're an author.
Yes. I think it was written by 2 members of SCBWI, I think like the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. Yes, I can spell. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. All right. So moving on to memory loss in Anomalies, also not to give anything away, there are some characters that experience, or actually even in Echoes, this isn't a spoiler, like it's in the blurb. There are characters that experience memory loss. And there are also points in the book where the first person narrators experience memory loss, and you have to describe this memory loss from the first person present tense. And I would love to hear like your process for figuring out how to describe all of like the mind twisty stuff that was happening, like especially when you had to change the voice before and after the memory loss, and like what the character in the first person knew before and after, because then, you know, the character becomes an unreliable narrator because it's been being told in the first person. So it's very difficult. And I was very impressed by the way that you tackled it in this book. And I was wondering if you might be able to give people some advice if they are also trying to do that for their books.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad that I executed it well. It is so tricky. It's so hard. The longer that I've been writing, the more I've realized that writing in the first person is actually a lot harder than writing in the third person, because you can't just describe like this happened, right? You have to look at everything through the lens of your character. And so it's something that I try to do is sometimes I'll write the scene and I'll just write everything that I'm thinking, right? And so everything that even I as the narrator know, but the characters don't know. And so the first draft is definitely just kind of getting it out and making sure all the pieces fit together, the timeline is consistent. And then when I go back and I reread it and I edit it, I really have to break down every single line and say, okay, is this something that this character would be observing or knowing about, even though they, you know, maybe they don't, they're not actually noticing that. Maybe they don't actually know that's happening. And so there's an indie author, a friend of mine, Sophie Johannes, who writes these really beautiful, like poetic, kind of like stream of consciousness-y kind of writing style. And so Traces and Below are her books, and I learned so much from reading those books about first person present tense narration, because her books are they're super different, they're super unique, and I think reading those books just helped me so much, because every single detail in her books, like every word, every line, every little piece means something. And so there's so much attention to detail that she does in her books. And so I think just reading somebody else that kind of did something similar to what I was trying to do totally like influenced what I was writing at the time. And so, yeah, it's so tricky. It's so tricky. And you really just have to break it down line by line and just make sure that everything is consistent. You have to make sure that everything is colored through this lens, right? Your character is looking and they can only see these things. And so, yeah, it's hard.
Did you do any work on like character voice when writing in the first person? Because like I have multiple first person narrators in my book, and like I had to do a lot of work personally, like figuring out how to differentiate the first person description and like words that they'd say and words they didn't say, so they didn't all sound the same. I know that you like have one narrator in your book, but did you have to do a lot of work trying to like nail her character voice?
Honestly, because I'm only writing one perspective, I haven't really had to worry about that too much. because Laura's voice is very similar to just my voice, like my writing voice in general. Like a lot of her thoughts are probably what I would be thinking in that scenario.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of part of the debut novel kind of thing. Like, I don't know. I feel like everybody's like first novel, they kind of just, you write kind of like from your own eyes because that's what you know. Right. And so it isn't until like later on, with my next book series that I'll be able to do a little bit better, creating characters. But yeah, I don't really, I want to make sure that Laura is consistent from book to book. That's kind of my biggest struggle, because I did write Echoes like 4 years ago, long time ago. And I took a long break and I did a lot of writing in between. I have like 3 half-written books that just need to be finished. And so my writing style changed a lot between writing Echoes and writing Anomalies. So that was a little bit of a struggle for me, of like, I really had to just go back and reread Echoes and get back into that voice. And that happens too when I'm reading other people's books. Mm-hmm. If I'm reading a book that like the character is like super sassy and like feisty, like my character starts becoming super feisty and sassy. So I have to be really careful to like reinsert myself back in the story when I go to write. And that's why kind of right now I'm reading third person books as I'm drafting the last book in my series, because if I start reading a first person book again, my character starts sounding like that first person narrative, because I'm just so heavily influenced by what I'm reading. So yeah, just it's hard, but you just rereading what you've already written before you jump into another writing session can really help you get back into that character's head, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Are there any other pieces of advice that you would give to people that want to be authors, or young adult authors in particular?
I don't give up. That's such a like, weird, that's like the same response everybody's probably going to say, but really, like, writing the sequel to Echoes, writing Anomalies, was such a struggle for me. And there were so many times where I was like, I can't do this. I cannot do this. I need to just stop. And so I think part of it is just taking time and being patient with yourself. Recognize that writing takes time. Getting better at it takes time. And so you might be a level 1 writer right now, but someday as you keep writing, you're going to be a level 10 writer. But it's like a video game. You can't just be a level 10 by like walking away from the game. You have to actually play the game and like do the stuff and get the skills so that you can become the level 10 writer. So just keep writing, write whatever you think of, and don't give up. You can do it. You can create anything that you put your mind to, and it might just take longer than something else if it's harder, but you can do it.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. And also, like, building off of that a lot of people, like, who read a lot, their taste might be more advanced. Like if they're still a level 1 writer, they might like level 10 books, and they might compare their writing to a level 10 book that they really like, and then think that they're terrible because they can't write a level 10 book, but they're like, they haven't been writing for very long. So like, try not to do that to yourself. And like, if you just keep working at it, then eventually you'll be able to tell that story the way that you wanted. Like, I have a book I've been working on since I was 15, and it's still not done. Like, I have this vision for this story, and I never had the like writing ability to express it the way that I wanted to. And now I'm slowly getting there, and like, I think it's going to be done like within the next 2 years. But like, it's some projects take a really long time, but that doesn't mean that somebody is a bad writer.
Yeah, exactly. When I was writing Anomalies, I read 6 of Crows to get ready for the Netflix
I'm reading
show.
that now, actually.
Oh, it's so good. And I remember reading that book and I was like, this book is so good. This writing is just phenomenal. Like, I want to be Leigh Bardugo so bad. Like, I just want to be that good of a writer. And so I was like really discouraged for a while. I was like, oh man, like, I can't write this good. And I realized that's like her second series, right? Like, she wrote Shadow and Bone first. And so you really just have to work at it to get better. And so don't compare your level 1 writing to someone else's level 10 writing. Just worry about yourself and how far you've come in your own journey.
Exactly. No, definitely. So those are all the questions that I have. Do you want to tell everybody where they can find you online?
Yes, I am. You can go to my website, marissalete.com. All of my social medias are linked through there. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on TikTok. I'm everywhere on the internet that I can possibly be. Instagram is my main place. I like Instagram better. TikTok, I'm working on. Twitter, I'm like dead silent on there. So you can follow me, but I might not post anything.
I know I've gotten so silent on TikTok like the past 2 weeks. Like I really thought that I could swing everything, but just like with this deadline, I'm like, all of my energy is going into this book right now. Like I am an introvert. I don't have that much of a social battery. Like I need to, yeah, but I will come back.
It ebbs and flows, and that's okay.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. Everybody go follow Marissa and go check out Echoes and Anomalies. They are fantastic books. I absolutely loved reading them, and I know that you will too. So you should go check them out. And thank you for chatting with me, and everybody like and subscribe. Bye.